Hi. So, just for the sake of the recording, what is your name?
William Frederick Honaman.
And when and where were you born?
I was born December the 16th, 1930, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, United States.
And what was life like growing up during the early 1900s?
Well, I was born in the Depression, so I'm a Depression baby. Uh, and I remember as a kid, things were fine. I had no uh, great deprivations. I was in a nice family. I had a younger brother. And until 1940, we had a nice life here in central Pennsylvania. And I think it was happy and good. And I learned to conserve things because of the Depression.
Hmm.
And so I have too much junk now in my house. I don't throw things out because I might find them a use for them at some time.
Hmm.
Uh, we moved several times. My father was a pastor in a church, so uh, we were fine until 1940 when the things started to happen in Europe and China. Japan was in China, so uh, my father was then in the army.
How strong was like this military culture then when you were growing up?
Well, in my particular case, since my father was in the army, I had a strong background, and he was with Pennsylvania National Guard, and when they became activated, he went on the division, moved to the south of the United States on training missions in Louisiana and Florida and Virginia, and we moved with him. He was the chaplain of an infantry regiment, and so we moved throughout the training cycle that the division went through. So I grew up as a teenager in with military background.
So at the time of the Korean War, were you an enlisted man or were you drafted?
I was a student in college, and I was finished with my sophomore year in college, and I also was in the National Guard of the state of Pennsylvania. And in September of 1950, we were activated. So I could not continue college since I was in the National Guard. And we were activated and went to Indiana for training. And at that time, I was uh, an enlisted man. But after, well, about a year, I guess, in Indiana where we were training, I I didn't see any advantage of staying there, and if we were in some kind of a war, I might as well do something. And so I applied to go to officers candidate school, and so I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I graduated as a second lieutenant in the infantry. Then I was reassigned to come back, strangely, come back to Pennsylvania. And I was at Indian Town Gap Military Reservation outside of Harrisburg. Uh, and I was a second lieutenant, and I was in a division that was giving basic training. So we trained people when they were drafted into the Army.
Mhm.
And while I was there, I got orders to go to Korea.
I see. And this was still when you were part of the National Guard, is that correct?
Well, after I became after I was commissioned in the Army, I was no longer part of the National Guard.
Hmm.
So I'd left my original unit that I trained in. I joined the National Guard in 1940, 46 or 47. And then in 50, we came on active duty, and then I went to OCS.
Mhm.
I was a second lieutenant in the infantry and assigned to go to Korea.
Right. So when you were assigned to go to Korea, where did you land?
I flew from the West Coast to Tokyo and went to Camp Drake, like so many other people.
Hmm.
And from Camp Drake, took the train down to Sasebo,
Hmm.
and from there to Busan. I landed on a Navy ship in Busan, took the train north to Uijeongbu, I think.
Hmm.
This was in 1953,
I see.
January.
So when you arrived in Korea, then what exactly were like the conditions like?
You know, I didn't really see. It's difficult. I didn't see that much because we landed in Busan, were put on trucks and went to the train station and on a train and went north. So we didn't see too much except the scenery, but things were not, they still saw the places where they'd been ravaged by the wars. So things were not good. But the whole time I had very little contact with civilians, or had no time, because we went right straight from Uijeongbu overnight. We went on truck up to the front line.
Hmm.
So we didn't really have contact with people.
Do you have any specific memories that you recall from your experience in the Korean War then?
Yeah,
Hmm.
sure. I was in combat. I ended up being wounded and evacuated. I was in a MASH hospital in Munsan-ni. I was leading a night patrol. We were sent out to destroy a pillbox of the North, which were Chinese. I fought against Chinese, not North Koreans.
Hmm.
So, and I was a patrol leader, and I was wounded in both legs and evacuated to a MASH hospital, operated on, and then sent to Korea, to Japan. I was in the hospital for 3 months in Japan, and then 3 months back in the United States.
Hmm.
Then went back to school.
Can you tell me? I've heard from other veterans about like the specific food that they received and how it wasn't very pleasant. Um, what was your experience with the food that the American Army sort of provided you with?
Well, after a while, you learned which C rations or K rations you wanted and which were the good ones.
Mhm.
So some of the combinations were not so good, and some were better than others. But we had them, so we had food to eat. I never experienced a time where I didn't have anything, even on the front line. And I spent a month a mile in front of the front line, uh, on a hill, an outpost. We were there for a month and just sitting on the top of a bare hill, living in a trench. And at night, a tank would come up behind the hill and open the hatch and throw out boxes of rations and water, and then go away. And we'd go back out through the barbed wire and pick it up and bring it. And so we always had, it was cold. We ate most of our food cold.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it, it was we lived, we survived.
Did you have any experiences with any foreign soldiers then?
Yes, yes. When I was on the front line, we were on the western sector. We crossed the Freedom Bridge, and if you go across the Freedom Bridge and head to Panmunjom, right across the bridge, you go right, but we went straight and followed along the railroad kind of thing. And I was up to the west of the line, west of Panmunjom, in a village called Tongjiangni. And we had the Turkish army was attached. I was in the 25th Division and the 27th Regiment, the Wolfhounds. And we were with the Turks. The Turks were also in our part of the 25th Division at that time. So yes, we had Turks, and I also saw some British troops also.
Were you able to personally interact with any of those like foreign soldiers?
Only in terms of talking where we met. They were on our left flank, so we tied in we knew that they were there, but that was it was strictly business reaction, nothing for leisure.
Mhm. So prior to joining like this Korean War effort, then what was your general perception of Korea and really East Asia in general?
Well, I knew where it was, and I knew part of its history. I'd had 2 years in college, and I was a history major, so I had some inclinations about. I knew where it was and knew a little bit about it, but not much.
What was the news sort of telling you about what was happening in Korea and Japan?
What was what?
What was the news generally telling you on things like the
Oh,
radio and the newspapers about Japan and Korea?
I don't really remember.
Hmm.
Well, when the North invaded into the South, that was big news. But beyond daily, I don't recall hearing too much. There were always reports because of course, we weren't in war officially. It was not an official war. So we're still in a peace treaty.
Hmm.
So I don't remember specifics about any news at that time. Sorry.
It's okay. So at the time, then, based on the fact that you can't really remember much of it, what was generally like the society's point of view of the Korean War then? Did many people know about it?
Oh, I think so. You mean in the States? People in the
Yeah,
States?
people in the States.
Yeah, I think people knew about it. It was only 5 years after the Second World War, which was a big deal, and everybody was involved in that. But the draft was on, so people were well aware that they could be drafted into the military. And I think people generally thought that it was something we needed to do to prevent communism. The old story, if South Korea goes, it's like dominoes.
Right.
That story was around. I thought people, but it sometimes is called the Forgotten War. I know. I noticed in the news here in the States, after what 500 and some thousand COVID deaths, all the news said it was more than the First World War, Second World War, and Vietnam. They never mentioned Korea.
Hmm.
So the Korean War is not a war, it's a police action or it's something, but those of us were there, it was a war. We were fighting.
So in your opinion, then you think that the Korean War is often called the Forgotten War because it's not regarded as a war by many people.
Yeah.
I see. So then after, coming back from Korea, then how did you integrate into society? Did you find it smooth or was it difficult for you to reintegrate back into society?
The main thing I remember was the speed of the cars on the highway. In
Mhm.
Korea, there was a 20-mile speed limit in the whole country with the US military. And so I remember when I flew back from Japan back to California and then into Pennsylvania. And my wife and my parents came to meet me in Harrisburg at the airport. And they drove us back to my parents' home. And I remember being afraid of going so fast on the highway. And it took me a while to get used to the speed and to driving myself again. I hadn't driven, for half a year or more that I was in Korea. That was difficult, but life in general, I got back in September of 1953 and went to Valley Forge Hospital in Pennsylvania and was released from active duty in the Army in November and started back college in January. So I went right back into normal life.
How long were you in Korea again?
I was only in Korea from January to June,
I see.
but I was injured on both my legs. We were in a firefight. We picked a fight. We went out to destroy a position on the Chinese trench line. So it was one of, I guess, in that part of the war, it was one of the last real fights because it was June the 19th. And the war was over in July.
So you stated before that you had a history major. What
Mhm.
exactly did you study in college then, and what kind of things did you continue to look at after coming back from the Korean War?
Well, I took a liberal arts education and I majored in history because that allowed me to take a lot of other courses in other fields. So I tried to get as broadly educated as I could. And then I took a specialty I took a special course on Asian history. And then after I graduated from college, I went to the University of Michigan to the Center for Japanese Studies. And I got a master's degree in Far Eastern Studies. So I specialized in that.
Mhm. So following your college experience, then what kind of occupation did you have, and what made you want to come back to your time in Korea?
Well, after I graduated from graduate school in the Center for Japanese Studies, I took the Foreign Service exam. I was considering going to the Foreign Service of at the State Department in the Diplomatic Corps. And I was waiting to take the physical. I had the written exam and the oral exam. But then I found in a newspaper ad that I'm a Christian and a member of the Episcopal Church. And I saw an ad in the newspaper that the Episcopal Church was seeking for a lay missionary to work with the church in Japan. And so I answered the one ad, and my wife and I went to New York for an interview, and we were hired as missionaries. So we went to Japan in 1958, in June of 1958, and retired in June of 2000. So we were in Japan that whole time. And from there, many times I went to Korea.
So when did you decide to become involved in veteran affairs?
When I retired and came to the United States, came to Pennsylvania, we live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the suburbs, in a place called Lidditz.
Mhm.
And that my family, all four grandparents were born and raised in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So we came back here, and I went to college in Lancaster at Franklin and Marshall College. So we came, after Japan, we came here, where we live now, to this house. We live in a retirement community.
Mhm.
So when we retired in 2000 at the age of 70, I was born in 1930. And so we retired and came and lived in this retirement community, and we're still here. And then I have a friend who we were in high school together, and he was a member of the Korean War Veterans Association, and he told me about it, so I joined it.
So have you kept up with current events in Korea recently?
Uh, hmm, Somewhat, not in detail, and not.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm aware of what's been going on. Yeah, I read what I read in magazines and see online.
Right. So seeing as Korea's sort of developed into this really prolific nation, um, have you ever felt some sort of pride, or what have you really felt based on Korea's growth over the past, 70 years?
Oh, great! Good for them. Pride? No. Eh, I did my part. That's all.
And lastly, in your eyes, a lot of South Koreans are obviously extremely grateful for your heroic actions, but in your own eyes, do you believe that fighting in the Korean War was ultimately justified?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm not. Well, I'm glad that I was able to do that, to help out. I've got, my blood is in the soil of Korea, so I feel some sort of attraction.
Yeah, I've heard from a lot of other veterans as well that this war was an extremely controversial conflict as well.
Yeah, it was. Uh, well, it was. We were pawns in history between trying to protect Japan and to protect. Well, the whole way Korea was divided is a mess anyway, because the Russians got in at the very last minute, and 2 weeks before the end of the war, they declared war on Japan. So that was just a political ploy so that they could get in on the occupation. And Russia wanted to take Hokkaido, the island in Japan, and MacArthur managed to keep them out of that. But and then Korea being divided was another ploy, and the division where they decided to divide it was just done on the spur of the moment by lower ranking officers. They looked at the map and saw the middle and said, well, how about across here? That doesn't make any sense. And Korea needs to be unified again. And say the same language, the same people. There are too many people living north and south who are related or families. It makes no sense to have a divided Korea. It was just because Russia wanted in on the act. In 2018, I went back to Korea at the invitation of the Korean government. It was during the anniversary of the founding of the Korean military.
Wow.
Can you read that?
Yeah.
You see me there in the front row, right here.
Oh, wow.
This is the commanding general of the forces. This is the defense minister. And here's the president. Here's the president, Mr.
Yeah.
Moon.
Mhm.
Here's the defense minister. This is General, I forget his name, but I was sitting next to him.
Right.
That big celebration, there was a big celebration in Seoul of the 70th anniversary of the army.
Right. Yeah. I think I recall on that day, people would just hang flags like outside their windows.
Yeah.
Yeah, of just Korean flags.
There was a big dance. This guy.
Oh, Psy. Yeah.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was there. This is what, the morning news or something?
Yeah. It's a very popular news.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's really impressive.
Then you can tell with my beard.
Right.
This is my son, my second son. He went with me.
Mhm. All right. Well, that's all the questions that I have for today. Thank you so much for your time.